I spent 45 years building bridges in Scotland, thinking I understood foundations. But at 70, a 22-year-old girl from Cebu taught me that some ground will always shift beneath you, no matter how deep you think you've dug. They say love makes fools of young men, but nobody warns you that loneliness can destroy an old one just as easily. I gave her everything, my pension, my trust, my future, and she took it all with a smile that I still see in my nightmares. If our stories resonate with you, don't forget to like, comment, and tell us where you're watching from. This story was shared with us by one of our long-time viewers, and he wanted his experience heard. I never thought I'd be the kind of man who'd pack everything at 70 and chase a dream halfway around the world. But there I was, standing in Glasgow airport with 2 suitcases and a pension that felt heavier in my pocket than it ever had in the bank. Margaret had been gone 3 years by then, and our house in Paisley felt like a museum of memories I couldn't bear to dust anymore. My daughter Sarah lived in London with her own family, too busy with her career to call more than once a month. My son Michael had moved to Australia after his divorce, chasing his own fresh start on the other side of the world. The silence in that house was killing me slowly, one empty dinner at a time. I'd wake up at 5 every morning, the same time I'd gotten up for work for 45 years, but there was nowhere to go. No bridges to inspect, no projects to manage, no purpose to fill the endless hours between dawn and darkness. The Philippines. Wasn't a random choice. I'd spent months researching, reading expat forums late into the night, watching YouTube videos about cheap living and year-round sunshine. The math was simple. My pension would stretch 3 times further in Southeast Asia than it would in Scotland. I could afford a nice apartment, eat out every night, maybe even hire someone to clean and cook. After decades of careful budgeting and sensible choices, the idea of living like a king on a pensioner's income felt like the adventure I'd never allowed myself. What the forums and videos didn't mention was that loneliness weighs the same in tropical heat as it does in Scottish rain. That being a stranger in a foreign country doesn't make you interesting, it just makes you more alone. The flight to Manila was 17 hours of second thoughts and small regrets. I kept telling myself this was temporary, just a trial run to see if the expat life was really for me. I could always go back to Scotland if things didn't work out, but sitting in that cramped economy seat, surrounded by families and young backpackers, I felt the weight of my 70 years in ways I'd never experienced before. My back ached, my knees wouldn't straighten properly, and the teenage girl next to me kept giving me sympathetic looks like I was her grandfather lost at the airport. "You visiting family in the Philippines, sir?" she asked during one of our brief conversations. I told her I was starting a new life, and the confused look on her face made me wonder if I was making the biggest mistake of my retirement. Cebu hit me like stepping into an oven wrapped in humidity and car exhaust. The apartment I'd rented online looked nothing like the photos, smaller, darker, with a view of concrete walls instead of palm trees. The air conditioner wheezed like an old man climbing stairs, and the shower produced lukewarm water that smelled faintly of sulfur. But the rent was right, barely $200 a month for what would have cost me $1,000 back home, and after 45 years of engineering deadlines and Glasgow winters, I told myself this was adventure. This was what starting over looked like at 70. The building's security guard, a thin man named Roberto, spoke enough English to help me figure out the basics: where to buy groceries, how to call a taxi, which restaurants wouldn't give me food poisoning on my first week. The first week was all tourist mistakes and learning curves that felt steeper at my age than they would have 20 years earlier. I ate street food that sent me running to the bathroom, got lost on jeepneys that seemed to follow routes only locals understood, and discovered that being white and 70 made me a walking target for every vendor, taxi driver, and friendly stranger who wanted to help me spend my money. "Hey Joe, you need massage? Sir, special price for you today. American, you buy for your wife?" The attention was overwhelming and exhausting. I'd lived my entire adult life blending into the background in Scotland, just another middle-aged engineer in a sea of middle-aged engineers. Here I was exotic, wealthy by local standards, and completely out of my element. Still, there was something liberating about being unknown, about walking streets where nobody expected me to be the dependable Duncan MacLeod who fixed things and paid bills on time. Nobody knew I'd lost my wife to cancer, that my children barely called, that I'd spent the last 3 years eating frozen dinners and watching television until bedtime. I could be anyone here, invent any story about my past, create any future I wanted. The freedom was intoxicating, even if the loneliness followed me like a shadow everywhere I went. I met her at a coffee shop in La Hougue, one of those air-conditioned places where expats gathered to feel normal again. The contrast between the blazing heat outside and the artificial cold inside was jarring, but it reminded me enough of home to become my morning ritual. I'd order the same terrible American coffee, sit at the same corner table, and pretend to read a book while watching the city wake up through the window. She was working as a server, all smiles and careful English, moving between tables with the kind of graceful efficiency that made the work look effortless. Rosanna was 22, with that natural beauty that seemed to come without effort to Filipino women, long black hair that caught the light when she moved, dark eyes that crinkled when she laughed, and a way of making you feel like the most interesting person in the room, even when you were just ordering coffee. "Good morning, sir. The usual?" she'd ask after my third visit, and something about the way she remembered my order made me feel seen in a way I'd forgotten was possible. I started going there every morning, not just for the coffee, but for those brief moments of connection. The way she'd ask about my plans for the day or comment on the weather. It was nothing romantic, not at first, just the simple pleasure of having someone notice whether I showed up or not. She'd ask about Scotland, about the weather, about what had brought me so far from home. When I told her about Margaret, about feeling lost in my own life after she died, Rosanna listened with a seriousness that surprised me. "You're brave, Sir Duncan," she said one morning, refilling my coffee cup without being asked. "Starting over is hard at any age, but especially when you've already lived a full life. Most people just accept what they have and wait to die. You chose to live again." It was the first time anyone had called me brave in decades, maybe ever. Margaret used to call me dependable, my children called me practical, my co-workers knew me as competent. But brave, that was a word I'd never associated with myself, and hearing it from this young woman who barely knew me felt like being handed a gift I didn't know I needed. What started as friendly conversation slowly became something more personal. Rosanna would take her breaks when I was there, sliding into the chair across from me and asking about my work, my family, my dreams for retirement in the Philippines. She had a way of listening that made me want to tell her things I'd never shared with anyone. About the loneliness after Margaret died, about feeling invisible in my own country, about the fear that I'd wasted my life building bridges for other people while never really living my own life. She told me about her own struggles, supporting her family in the provinces, sending her younger brother to school, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. There was something genuine about her concern, something that felt different from the calculated friendliness I'd learned to expect from locals who saw dollar signs in my pale skin. "My family, they work so hard, but never get ahead," she said, one afternoon, stirring sugar into her own coffee with careful precision. "My papa, he drives tricycle 12 hours every day, but still we cannot save money. Everything goes to food, to rent, to my brother's school. Sometimes I wonder if this is all there is, you know? Work until you die, never have anything nice, never travel, never see the world like you have." The sadness in her voice was real, and I found myself wanting to fix it the same way I'd once fixed structural problems in my engineering work. Here was a problem with a clear solution: money. I had it, she needed it, and helping her would give my retirement a purpose beyond just existing until I died. When she accepted my invitation to dinner at a proper restaurant, I felt like a teenager again. She dressed up for the occasion, wore a simple blue dress that made her look even younger, and listened intently as I told stories about building bridges across Scottish rivers and raising 2 children who barely called anymore. "You have such interesting life," she said over dessert, her English careful but expressive. "I want to hear everything, was your work, your wife, your children, how you decide to come here. You are not like other foreigners I meet. You have kind eyes." The compliment hit me harder than it should have, and I realized how hungry I'd been for someone to see me as more than just another lonely old expat with money to spend. The relationship moved fast, faster than I'd expected at my age. Within a month, Rosanna was spending nights at my apartment, filling the silence with her laughter and the sounds of someone else moving through the rooms. She had a way of making everything feel domestic and comfortable, folding my clothes with more care than I'd ever bothered with, organizing my medications in a pill dispenser that actually made sense, laughing at my terrible attempts to learn Tagalog phrases from YouTube videos. "You sound like you have marbles in your mouth," she'd tease when I tried to pronounce salamat correctly. "But it's cute. You're trying so hard to understand my culture." She cooked Filipino dishes that reminded me how lonely I'd been eating alone for 3 years. Adobo that was better than any restaurant, rice perfect and fluffy, vegetables I'd never heard of that somehow tasted like comfort food. When she first mentioned her family's money troubles, helping felt as natural as breathing. Her father needed treatment for diabetes, medication that cost more than he made driving his tricycle around the dusty streets of their provincial town. Her younger brother Carlo was brilliant, she said, but his scholarship only covered tuition. The family still needed to pay for books, uniforms, transportation to the better school in the city. I'd lived frugally my whole life, saved every penny Margaret and I could spare, built a pension that was supposed to last me until I died. What good was money if not to share with someone who made me feel alive again? The first transfer was modest, just enough to help with her father's medication. But Rosanna's gratitude was overwhelming. The way she cried and thanked me, the way she held me that night like I was her hero, instead of just a lonely old man with a decent savings account. "You don't understand what this means," she whispered, against my chest that first night after I'd helped her family. "My whole life I watch my parents worry about money. Every day, will we have enough for food, for rent, for medicine? You take that worry away with one simple transfer. You are like angels sent from heaven." The words should have sounded rehearsed, too perfect, but the tears on her face felt real. The relief in her voice when she called her mother to share the good news sounded genuine. For the first time since Margaret died, I felt useful again, needed for something more than just existing and taking up space in the world. The request started small and spread slowly, like water finding cracks in concrete. Rosanna's family always seemed to be one emergency away from disaster, and I found myself becoming their unofficial safety net. Her mother, Elena, needed surgery for gallstones, a simple procedure but expensive by local standards. Her brother's scholarship was reduced, requiring additional payments to keep him in the good school. Their house needed repairs after a typhoon that I never quite confirmed on the weather reports, but the photos of damage looked real enough. Each time, Rosanna would come to me with tears and apologies, promising to pay me back when things got better, when her father found steadier work, when the family situation stabilized. "I hate asking you for help," she'd say, sitting on the edge of the bed while I checked my online banking. "It makes me feel like I'm using you, and that's not who I am. But my family, they have no one else. My aunts and uncles, they are struggling too. My cousins in Manila, they have their own problems. You are the only person who can help us, and I know that's not fair to you." I wasn't naive. I knew I was being generous to a fault, but seeing her relief when I transferred the money, feeling needed again, was worth more than the money itself. My pension could handle it, I told myself. This was what retirement savings were for, to build something meaningful instead of just surviving until I died. Besides, Rosanna had started talking about marriage, about making this arrangement permanent, about the beautiful life we could build together with my financial stability and her youth and energy. I never thought I could love an older man. She told me one evening as we watched the sun set from my small balcony. "But age, it doesn't matter when someone treats you with respect, when they care about your dreams, your family. You make me feel safe in a way I never felt before. With Filipino men my age, there is always competition, always worry they will leave for someone prettier, younger. But you choose me every day. You show me what real love looks like." The words filled a hollow place in my chest that I'd been carrying since Margaret's funeral. Meeting Rosanna's family should have been a red flag parade, but I was too deep in the fantasy to see clearly. Her mother, Elena, was warm and welcoming, speaking limited English but making it clear through gestures and smiles that she approved of me. She'd hold my hands between both of hers and speak rapidly in Tagalog while Rosanna translated. "She says you have a good heart, that she can see why I love you, that she's grateful for how you've helped our family." Her father was quieter, more reserved, but he'd nod respectfully when I spoke and always made sure my plate was full during family dinners. Her brother Carlo seemed like a genuinely good kid, serious about his studies and articulate when discussing his plans to become a teacher. He thanked me personally for helping with his education, speaking in careful English about his goals and dreams. Even her extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins who seemed to materialize whenever I visited, treated me like a beloved patriarch, always ready with food and stories and gentle requests for assistance with various hardships. Tita Rosa needed help with her husband's hospital bills. Kuya Jun's motorcycle broke down and he needed it for work. Cousin Mila's daughter was getting married and they couldn't afford a proper reception. I felt like I'd found something I'd lost after Margaret died, a sense of belonging, of being valuable beyond just my ability to pay bills and fix things. The fact that every gathering somehow ended with someone needing financial help started to feel normal, even expected. "This is Filipino culture," Rosanna explained when I mentioned how often her relatives seemed to have money problems. Family takes care of family. When one person has good fortune, they share with everyone. When you marry me, you become part of this family, and family helps each other. I know it's different from Western culture, where people are more independent, but here we survive together or we don't survive at all. Her explanation made sense, and I found myself proud to be the provider, the stable foundation that kept this large, loving family afloat during difficult times. We married 6 months after meeting. A simple ceremony at the local civil office, followed by a celebration at a beach resort that I paid for gladly. Rosanna looked radiant in her white dress, and for a moment, standing there with her hand in mine while a Filipino judge spoke the words that would bind us together, I genuinely believed I'd found my second chance at happiness. The beach was perfect, the food was delicious, and watching her family celebrate our union felt like being welcomed into something warm and meaningful. Even the legal paperwork felt routine. Joint bank accounts that would make transfers easier, property agreements that would protect her interests, immigration documents that would let her visit Scotland someday to see where I'd come from. My children called to congratulate me, their voices carefully neutral over the international connection. Sarah asked questions I didn't want to answer about prenups and background checks. "Dad, I'm happy you found someone, but don't you think this is all happening very quickly? 6 months isn't very long to really know someone, especially someone from such a different culture." Michael was more direct. "Are you sure she's not just after your money? I mean, what does a 22-year-old want with a 70-year-old man except financial security?" I told them they didn't understand, that loneliness was a luxury young people could afford to judge. At 70, you grabbed happiness where you found it and worried about the details later. Rosanna moved into my apartment officially after the wedding, bringing more of her belongings and, inevitably, more of her family's financial obligations. Her presence transformed the space completely. Photos of her family on the walls, Filipino cooking smells filling the kitchen, the sound of her voice talking to relatives on the phone at all hours. Her family's needs seemed to multiply with our marriage, as if the ceremony had unlocked some deeper level of crisis that required immediate attention. Now that I was officially family, the requests came more frequently and with greater urgency. Her father's diabetes was getting worse, requiring more expensive medications and regular doctor visits. Carlo needed a laptop for his advanced classes, plus special tutoring to keep up with the accelerated program. "I'm sorry, Mahal," she'd say, using the Tagalog word for love that she'd taught me. "I know we just got married and you want time to enjoy being newlyweds, but family emergencies, they don't wait for convenient times. My mother is crying every night because Papa is getting sicker, and Carlo is afraid he'll have to drop out of school. I cannot watch my family suffer when we have the power to help them." The guilt was expertly applied, not demanding, just heartbreaking enough to make saying no feel cruel. And the amounts weren't unreasonable individually, a few $100 here and there. It was only when I started adding them up that I realized how quickly they were accumulating. 6 months into marriage, I began to understand the true scope of what I'd committed to. Rosanna had access to my accounts now, and what had started. As occasional emergency requests had evolved into monthly expectations, her father's medical bills were growing more complex. Specialist consultations, experimental treatments, medical equipment that needed to be purchased outright because insurance didn't cover it. Her brother had switched schools twice, each transition requiring new deposits, uniforms, books, and fees that seemed to increase with each move. Their house, which I'd helped repair after the typhoon, apparently needed complete renovation to remain safely livable. New roof, foundation work, electrical updates that couldn't wait. The amounts were getting larger, and my pension, which had seemed so substantial in Scotland, was disappearing faster than I'd thought possible. When I tried to discuss budgeting with Rosanna, she'd cry and ask if I didn't trust her, if I didn't love her family, if I was already regretting our marriage. "I thought you understood Filipino culture," she'd say through tears. "I thought you wanted to be part of a real family, not just someone who helps when it's convenient. My family loved you from the first day I brought you home. They welcomed you like a son, a brother, a father. And now you want to count every peso like we are strangers." The emotional manipulation was subtle but effective. I was the rich foreigner who didn't understand local values. She was the dutiful daughter, trying to honor her obligations to the people who raised her. Every attempt to set boundaries was reframed as cultural insensitivity or a failure to appreciate how much her family had embraced me. "In the Philippines, when you marry someone, you marry their whole family," she'd remind me. "You said you wanted a new life here. This is what life looks like, people taking care of each other, not just thinking about themselves all the time like in the West." The logic was circular and unassailable. Any reluctance to provide money was evidence that I didn't truly understand or appreciate Filipino culture. The revelation came by accident, the way most devastating truths do. I was looking through our paperwork for Rosanna's insurance documents when I found a folder of bank statements and receipts that painted a very different picture of our finances. The money I'd been sending for her father's medical treatment had been deposited into accounts I didn't recognize, not the local hospital or clinic I'd assumed. Her brother's school fees were a fraction of what she'd told me, and some of the emergency expenses had been duplicated across multiple months with different explanations. There were receipts for luxury purchases, designer handbags, expensive jewelry, electronics, that Rosanna had never mentioned owning, all purchased during our marriage while she was crying to me about her family's desperate need for basic necessities. Most damning was a series of text messages I accidentally saw on her phone when she asked me to check if her mother had responded to a message. The conversations were in Tagalog, but my translation app revealed discussions about managing me, about keeping me happy and generous, about timing requests for maximum emotional impact. "He gave me $2,000 yesterday for Papa's medicine," one message read. "I told you the old Scottish guy is easy to manipulate. Just cry a little and talk." About family honor. Another discussed strategy. "Don't ask for money too often or he'll get suspicious. Space it out, make each request seem urgent, and always have a good story ready." The woman I'd married, the gentle girl who'd called me brave and listened to my stories about Margaret, had been running a careful, calculated operation from the beginning. Every tear, every expression of gratitude, every moment of intimacy had been performed with the specific goal of extracting as much money as possible from a lonely old man who just wanted to feel needed again. The realization hit me like a physical blow, leaving me sitting on the floor of our bedroom, surrounded by evidence of my own stupidity, wondering how I could have been so blind to what was happening. When I confronted Rosanna with the evidence, she didn't deny it so much as reframe it. "Yes, I help my family with the money you give," she said, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. "But isn't that what marriage is about? Isn't that why you married? Me to have someone who would use your money wisely, instead of just letting it sit in the bank while people suffer?" She sat on our bed, completely composed while I stood there shaking with anger and hurt, holding bank statements like weapons that somehow couldn't touch her. "Yes, I buy nice things sometimes. Don't I deserve to have something beautiful after working so hard to take care of you, to make you happy? The money is still in the family, still being used for good purposes. So what is the real problem? Her logic was simultaneously infuriating and impressive. She'd managed to turn my financial ruin into a moral failing on my part, as if discovering her deception made me the villain in our story. "You want to talk about manipulation?" she continued, her voice growing harder. "What about an old man who comes to a poor country and uses his money to buy a young wife? What about someone who thinks he can purchase love and loyalty because he has more money than the people around him? You were lonely and desperate, and I gave you what you needed. I made you feel important, loved, needed. That has value too, doesn't it?" The fight lasted hours, cycling through tears, accusations, and ultimatums that revealed just how carefully she'd planned this entire relationship. She knew exactly how much money I had, how much my pension was worth, how long she could continue, extracting payments before I had nothing left. She'd researched me as thoroughly as I'd thought I'd researched the Philippines, learning my weaknesses, my vulnerabilities, my desperate need for connection. By the end of our confrontation, the gentle girl I'd fallen in love with had been replaced entirely by someone cold and calculating, someone who made it clear that my choice was simple: accept the arrangement as it was, or lose everything I thought. We'd built together. My pension was nearly gone, my savings depleted, and I was legally tied to someone who saw me as a resource rather than a husband. "You can leave if you want," she said with a shrug that broke something inside me. "But you signed papers when we got married. Half of everything is mine now, including your pension payments. And good luck explaining to your children back home how you lost everything to a girl young enough to be your granddaughter. At least if you stay, you still have someone to take care of you when you get sick, someone to make sure you don't die alone in this apartment." The threat was delivered with the same sweet smile she'd used when serving me coffee 6 months earlier. The months following our confrontation were a masterclass in emotional manipulation and financial abuse. Rosanna didn't leave. That would have been too obvious, and besides, staying meant continued access to whatever remained of my money. Instead, she became distant and punishing, treating me like an unwanted tenant in my own apartment while continuing to access my dwindling accounts. For her family's endless needs, she'd disappear for days at a time, returning with stories about sick relatives and family obligations that always seemed to require immediate financial intervention. Her father's condition was worsening, requiring more expensive treatments. Carlo needed additional tutoring to maintain his grades. The family house had new problems: plumbing issues, electrical failures, structural damage that couldn't wait. My attempts to set boundaries were met with tears, accusations of cruelty, and threats to leave me alone in a foreign country where I had no real friends or support system. "You want me to let my family suffer because you are having second thoughts about being generous?" she'd ask, her voice heavy with disappointment. "This is not the man I married. The man I married understood that love means sacrifice, that family comes first, that money is just a tool to help people. Now you count every peso like a miser, like someone who never learned what real love looks like." The isolation was complete and deliberate. She'd systematically separated me from other expats who might have warned me, from family back home who might have offered help, from any perspective that didn't center her needs and her family's endless crises. When I tried to reach out to other foreigners in the expat community, Rosanna would find ways to sabotage the connections. She'd create scheduling conflicts when I was invited to social gatherings, claim to be sick or upset whenever I made plans. That didn't include her, and gradually convinced me that other expats were jealous of our relationship and couldn't be trusted. "They don't understand what we have," she'd say when I mentioned wanting to join a weekly card game with some retired Americans I'd met at the coffee shop. "They see a beautiful young Filipina with an older foreign man, and they think they know everything. They'll try to poison your mind against me, make you suspicious and paranoid. Is that what you want?" The emotional manipulation was so skillful that I often found myself apologizing for wanting basic social connections outside our marriage. The end came not with drama, but with a quiet, devastating clarity. Sitting alone in my apartment one evening, calculating what remained of my pension and what I'd need to survive until the end of the month, I finally understood what had happened to me. I hadn't found love in the Philippines. I'd been systematically harvested by someone who understood exactly how lonely, hopeful, and vulnerable I was. Rosanna hadn't fallen for a 70-year-old Scottish engineer. She'd identified a mark and executed a perfect long-term con. The gentle girl who'd called me brave, who'd listened to my stories about Margaret and my children, who'd made me feel valued and alive again. That person had never existed. She'd been a performance, carefully calibrated to exploit every weakness in my emotional armor. The tears when I'd helped her family were fake. The gratitude when I'd paid for her father's medication was manufactured. The love she'd claimed to feel for me was nothing more than professional dedication to a job that paid extremely well. I'd been so desperate for connection, so hungry to feel needed again, that I'd mistaken predation for love and financial abuse. For cultural difference. The worst part wasn't the money, though losing my financial security at 70 was terrifying. The worst part was realizing that I'd been so completely fooled, so easily manipulated, that I'd participated in my own destruction with enthusiasm. Now I'm 71, living in a studio apartment I can barely afford, with a pension that won't last another year if I'm careful, and 6 months if I'm not. Rosanna is gone, moved on to whatever her next opportunity might be, though I occasionally see social media posts showing her with another older foreigner, someone who looks at her with the same hopeful expression I once wore. She never divorced me legally. That would have meant giving up her claim to half my pension payments. But she moved out one day while I was at the market, taking everything of value and leaving behind only the furniture that was too big to transport easily. My children have offered to help, to send me money or bring me back to Scotland, but accepting their charity feels like admitting a failure too profound for words. How do you explain to your daughter that you gave your entire future to someone who saw you as nothing more than a walking ATM? How do you tell your son that his inheritance disappeared into the pockets of strangers who performed affection for money? The shame is almost as devastating as the financial loss, the knowledge that I was so easily deceived, so completely taken in by someone who never felt a moment of genuine emotion for me. I spent 45 years building bridges, understanding load calculations and stress points, knowing exactly how much weight a structure can bear before it collapses. But I never learned to recognize when someone was systematically dismantling the foundation beneath my feet. The Philippines is still beautiful, still cheap, still full of genuine people living genuine lives. But I see it differently now, with the hard-earned knowledge that predators exist everywhere, and that loneliness makes us all vulnerable in ways we never expect until it's too late to matter. I have maybe 6 months of money left, and then I don't know what happens. But I wanted someone to hear this story, to understand what happened to me, so maybe the next lonely old man won't make the same mistakes I did.